welcome to the Point. For this week's show, we've returned here to Flint to find out how this city is doing after their years-long battle with the water crisis. We talked with Senator Jim Ananich, a frequent guest on our show as he is the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, but this morning's show is focused very much on Flint and its ongoing recovery. Senator, it's been over a year and a half since I first visited you here in Flint to talk about the conditions on the ground, but you had talked to me for weeks, if not months before that, because you and the people in Flint knew something was amiss here. So now let's fast forward to the fall of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
We know pretty much where you've been. Where's Flint today?
That's a good question. I think it's an important question because, this isn't, we're not getting the attention, so obviously there's a lot of disasters are happening, and obviously my thoughts and prayers are with the folks in the South right now with the hurricane and the dealing with that. But the folks in Flint are still struggling. There's obviously some improvement, there's no question about that. And I think one of the things I think a lot of folks have learned, especially when they come to Flint, is the people of Flint are tough and they're strong and they're going to come out of this. We're going to come out of this fine and better. But it's still going to be a long journey. In many ways, some of the programs are starting to have an effect. We're seeing more kids in early childhood programs. We're seeing more kids having access to primary care. A lot of cooperation's happening in our community. But at the same time, we still need to get the pipes removed. We still want to make sure that for the long term that there's a commitment that this is going to be resolved, and that the families that were hurt are going to have care for as long as they need it. And we're not 100% there yet, but we're going to keep fighting.
One of the things that you and I have talked about, and it strikes me today as we were driving in, there was a time when you couldn't park out here because of the satellite trucks and because of the national media attention, and Time Magazine was here in their famous article. And you and I discussed what happens when the lights go out, what happens when the cameras go home. Well, they have, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
And the question then is, how do you, as the senator, the minority leader in the Senate, and the senator from Flint, how do you keep your colleagues' attention focused on a problem that is still very current and real for you and your constituents?
I think that's an important question. It's something I think about all the time. I've developed good relationships on both sides of the aisle, both chambers. I think I bring credibility, and I think they know that when I speak, I'm speaking honestly, and I'm doing from the heart. So I think that helps a little bit. There's no question about it. They have their own constituencies and communities they got to worry about. And most of the things that I'm talking about are things that in large part help the rest of the state as well, right? One of the things that I'm going to be pushing for in the fall, and my colleagues, Jim Thomas, who was the chair of the committee that we formed around Flint, and Senator Joe Hune, we talked before recess in the summer, and we're going to come back in the fall and really make a hard push for some of those changes to make sure that no community has to go through this again. Now, obviously, my primary concern is going to be the people of Flint and Genesee County that have had to deal with this, but I don't want to see this happen to anybody else. I don't want to see it happen to the older cities across the state in particular, because that's who they're most vulnerable. But I think hopefully what people have learned from this is that we need to be very careful and very cognizant of our water quality, and that we have proactive steps we can take to make sure we protect ourselves. This isn't something we need to all, families don't need to be worried out, freaking out and feeling like that they're endangering their child, but they need to be careful. They should have their water tested. They should make sure that their community has a plan at some point in time to remove the old infrastructure, the old pipes, and that we have to do this at the national level. And hopefully there's going to be people learn that the people of Flint were wrong. They did nothing wrong, and they need to have help. We've seen generous amounts of money coming in, huge amounts of money, very generous from across the country, across the world, and that's great. But we have to do more to make sure that nobody else, this never happens again. And hopefully some of the legislation we're going to push in the fall will help codify some of that. Because no policy changes have really been made except one, to make sure that we're more careful to make sure this doesn't happen again.
I want to talk about the condition on the ground here in Flint, but since we've started talking about policy changes, one of the things that came about, not necessarily all because of Flint, but perhaps partially, was a study about infrastructure spending. And we went through this long, protracted dance about getting more money into the roads, which was largely for roads, bridges, transportation in general, but infrastructure more broadly, including water systems, sewers throughout the state, is about a $4 billion price tag, according to that study.
Yeah.
But yet nothing's been done on appropriations end. Is that something that you're going to be looking at?
Well, I think that's a longer term conversation, and one that has to happen at the federal level as well. I mean, because really we have a multi-billion dollar problem across this country. But yes, no question about it. The problem is coming up with $4 billion. And the reason it's $4 billion is for so long, people on both sides of the aisle, I'm not going to try to blame, this is not a partisan attack. This is something that has been done over the years on both sides. This is an area where they kick the can down the road. And now we're seeing this huge problem, and we have to start addressing it. There's no question about it, because the roads are going to crumble and they're going to keep getting worse, even with the roads package. You're going to pay more tax and the roads are going to get worse for a while. You don't even see the sewer and the water lines. So that's even getting less attention. So we have to make sure that we focus on that and make sure it's a long-term priority. Now, I don't think the state can bear that burden alone. The federal government's going to have to step in, and hopefully, I don't hope a lot of good things come out of Washington, D.C. I hope for it, but I don't expect it. Maybe we'll have some longer-term vision coming out of that, because we have to make sure we're protecting schools and families and all across the state, and really all across this country, because Flint is the canary in the coal mine. This is, a lot of mistakes were made to lead to the devastation that happened to Flint, but other communities are in harm's way as well, because these old lead pipes, these galvanized steel pipes are a problem, and they're going to be a problem that we have to deal with.
When you think about that big, broad stroke plan that needs to come out of the federal government, and by the way, it's not because I think it does or even you think it does, but there is a considerable agreement on both sides of the aisle in Washington that an infrastructure package needs to happen. The problem is that politics will get in the way, as it always does. However, there is some hope that that could be a unifier, at least for some in DC. But even at that, the federal government, and you and I both have our experiences in Washington, it is like molasses on a cold Flint day.
Yes.
And so none of that's going to be quick.
No.
So is the money that's in the pipeline for Flint alone now adequate to do some of the things that you would like to do? For example, where are we when it comes to replacing pipes here?
Yeah, I think we have probably enough to cover the issues in Flint. I'm always hesitant to say exactly, but the court ordered, and it's unfortunate that it had to come to had to go to the courts to deal with this. This should have been something that we could have came together and said, let's solve this. But the court mandated that 6,000 pipes a year for the next 3 years, so 18,000 total, be removed using state and federal resources. So we have enough money for that. And the main problem in Flint, and probably in most cities, is the service line. So basically from the home to the main line. And that's the cheaper portion because it's smaller. So we know that's a problem. Now you start digging it up and you see main lines to have big problems, then it's going to cost more. And I think there's obviously a responsibility at the state level to cover that. So to cover what was mandated by the court, we have enough resources for that. We have enough dollars for that. And then the next step, though, is do we have enough? We're starting to see more kids coming in. They're testing. It's not slowing down finding kids testing with high levels of lead. It's actually increasing. So we don't exactly know the full measure of the problem. So the good thing is that the medical community, especially leading through Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha and Dr. Reynolds and other folks, are really working well together to make sure that we're addressing the problem. But this, lead doesn't manifest itself in every person the same. So some people could be sick now, they may not get sick till later, they may never get sick, hopefully they don't. But kids are the most in harm's way because they're still growing, their immune system is still being built. So we may have a problem down the road, and that area of funding I'm a little more concerned about. The infrastructure, I think we've got the money there for that, but the commitment to make sure that if something happens down the road, that's an area that I'm gonna have to keep fighting for.
I want to go back and clarify. You say that there are higher numbers of kids that are testing for lead now, but is it, and I know you're not a doctor, but is it the belief of the medical community that this is a manifestation of the former contamination and not something else out there that is still contaminated? I
think what's happening is they're getting more access, so that they're now, the kids that had the issue, they weren't seeing it, they weren't getting the care they needed. Now there's a program called CHAP that's funded through the Department of Health and Human Services Child Health Access Program. They're seeing increases in the number of home visits to the families that have lead. So that's what I mean by, it's not, I don't necessarily think they're getting more kids are getting ingesting lead-filled water. That's not the case. It's more that the issues are starting to show, and they're getting the care they need, which is a good thing. But we also have an expanded Medicaid allowance here in Flint, but we still need to get more people to sign up for it, because I think a lot of folks, because the trust was broken, that they don't want to answer the door, they just don't trust anybody. So they have this access to higher quality, no copay, some of the issues that really could help families, and we still need to have more of them sign up for it.
When you talk about people not wanting to answer the door, you even had that problem when people were trying to deliver water. I remember very early on we were talking about that. The last time we did this show, we've done several shows in between,
Sure.
I should point out, but
Yeah.
the last time that we were here in Flint, we were over at the fire station where people were coming in and picking up water, and part of the problem was some people were afraid to come pick up the water, some people were afraid to open their door for it, for any number of reasons. How many people would you guess, what percentage would you guess now people are still using bottled water?
Oh, it's a large percentage. I don't know what percentage, but I think the more troubling number is the folks that it's amazing, but that may not have the accurate information. They're just still never drink bottled water. They continue to just drink, unfiltered water from the tap because they just didn't have access. And it seems hard to believe now with so much access to information. They just didn't trust, didn't have. A lot of folks take for granted the day-to-day interactions. Some people that were homebound, a lot of the seniors weren't getting information, didn't have access to it, didn't feel like they had access to a filter. We've had a lot of folks come together and help address that. The Valley Area Agency on Aging has worked with ARP, and they have a home delivery program now. So if you drive by large parts of Flint, if you go in the house especially, you can see just stacks and stacks of bottled water. So a lot of folks are still using it. What percentage, I don't know, but some folks will have. They're not using the pods as much because when they go, they can get 10 to 20 cases at a time. So you see folks that have basically built almost like a fort of bottled water because they just don't trust it.
And there is much more to talk about when it comes to Flint. We'll do that with Senator Jim Ananich next. To the Point. For many people, the Flint water crisis is something that happened. For the people here in Flint, it's something that continues to happen. We continue our conversation with Senator Jim Ananich. One of the things you said that I'm interested in early on in our conversation is that Flint folks are tough, and we will come back and we will come back better. Let me ask you if this would be an accurate portrayal. One of the things that manifested out of this entire crisis was more attention to nutritional needs of people who were underserved, also medical that we've already talked about, education, early childhood education.
Yeah.
And one could make the case, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all of that needed to happen anyway.
Oh, no question about it.
But now it is happening.
Yes. We're getting the services that a lot of communities and definitely people in Flint needed for a long time, and we're doing it in a way that's very localized. And what I mean by that is it's not a Lansing telling you how to do it, it's not Washington, D.C. telling people how to do it, which having seen, living here on the ground, a lot of those programs that don't maybe have the same effect as they should, it's because there's so many rules coming out of Washington and Lansing. We've been able to come together and use private dollars, philanthropic dollars, and public dollars, and blending it in a way that we're really providing the kind of service that people need, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. So I think we're fortunate in a sense. This never should have happened, of course, but we're fortunate in the sense that we have a lot of caring people figuring out ways to get nutrition, whether it's through the backpacks in schools, whether it's through a better school snacks and lunches. There's a lot of access to early childhood programs, very successful programs. A new program is going to start in the fall. A brand new Educare building was built on the west side of Flint. We're seeing a lot more cooperation between some of the nonprofits, which a lot of communities, people don't necessarily know this unless they're working there. A lot of these nonprofits compete with each other. They don't work together. We're not seeing that now. I'm not trying to paint a completely rosy picture because we still have a number of issues that have to be addressed, and it's still not, we still have a long way to go. But we just, you might have seen an announcement from Consumers and Tom Gores, who owns the Pistons. They've just both donated $1 million each to the Flint Promise. That bill hopefully will pass the House within the next couple of weeks, and then we can concur on it in the Senate. It's my bill to expand promise zones in Flint particularly, but we may do it so it's a little more broader. And then we can have a program where if you live in Flint, go to schools in the charter or public, in some cases private, you can have tuition free for at least 2 years, maybe 4 if we can build it, in large part through private donations and then a little bit through the state promise. We're trying to give people hope and people a better outcome from this travesty that happened to them.
Well, let's talk about that, because that really, I guess, is the thing that I am most interested in, because you made the point, you were the first person to make the point to me, that beyond everything else that happened, and as you point out, it never should have happened, and there were real serious consequences, and people are going to be dealing with them for a long time, and I know what your concerns are. But beyond that, one of the big casualties was trust.
Oh, yeah.
And you say that remains the same. What, and I know you can't speak for every individual, but I know you interact with a lot of folks here. What is their thought about you going to Lansing, you know, and dealing with people that they're still a little unsure about?
Yeah, it's, you know, I like to think that I've built some trust over the years serving people. I'm a pretty, you know, I mean, you've interviewed me a number of times. You ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. I mean, I don't give always a political answer. I try to be honest. I'm not perfect. I do the best I can. But when I run into folks, they don't trust the people in Lansing. They don't trust the governor. They don't trust many things that's happening downtown. And in many cases, there's reasons for that. You know, my colleagues, I think, especially in the Senate, I'm always going to, you know, I'm probably never going to be satisfied. And it's not just with Flint, it's just how I am, right? I reach a goal, then I move the goalpost for myself. I'm always going to be pushing for more. But my colleagues, the Majority Leader, Arlen Meekoff, the Appropriations Chair, David Hildebrand, have been very fair, and they listen to the concerns I have. They haven't done everything I wanted to do, but, you know, it's life, right? I mean, but they've been very fair. They've helped me access resources when we've needed to make changes. They've been very, very helpful with that. So they don't. My constituents don't see these individuals, and they don't know how many of them are helpful in both chambers. And there's times when we disagree with the governor's office on this, but there's times we're working together. My colleagues Sheldon Neely and Phil Phelps and I work very well on this. It's been tough, but there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of folks that feel like they're going to get left behind. I can tell you. You said I can't speak for everybody because I can't, but I can tell you I probably have more access to information than probably anybody does. The exception of, like, you know, maybe some folks at DEQ. I still don't drink the water. I know from testing that it's safe in my house, at least from a lead perspective. I just don't know. I don't know. Like, my mind and my heart and my mind are saying different things. My mind says, you know, it's okay to drink this water. My memory says, well, they lied to you before. So I'm very careful to talk about water quality because it's not my background. The Medical Society is still saying that we need to be using filters because they're seeing bacterial problems. Even though the lead issue has dramatically gone down, there's no question. The quality of the water for lead has gotten much better. I've joked with people. I say our water is just as crappy. We know now it's just as crappy as your water is because the standards on lead are too high. We should not allow this much lead, and that's something we have to work on as well. We need to be lowering the amount of acceptable lead to the point where obviously no lead is acceptable. So our water's back to the crappy condition everyone else has, and I think we need to do better than that. But it's to give a long answer to a simple question. I think folks just don't understand what I'm dealing with down there, and I try to paint a pretty realistic picture that I have a lot of folks helping me, but it's a long haul, and they have 10 million people in the state, and my colleagues have to represent their communities. So I'm going to keep going down there and working hard for getting as much resources as we need.
What does that say about what this community is still up against if someone who is intimately involved in this process, and as you say yourself, your head says, this water's okay, but I got a little son and I got a wife and we're not drinking this water. I mean, if that's the way you feel and you're the guy that's talked face-to-face with the engineers, you've talked first face-to-face with the water quality experts and the medical community and everyone else. If you're feeling that way, what does it say for the rest of the community?
Yeah, I think it shows that we have to have caution, and it's unfortunate because, my dad was an ombudsman in the city of Flint, so I've always been a skeptic of government. I'm not somebody who doesn't believe that government can do good, but I'm skeptical of people that use power to further their own gain. So I'm always going to look behind the curtain and say, okay, what's going on here? So I'm not necessarily the best person to look at that because I'm a skeptic by nature, but it shows people we need to be cautious. We need to make sure we have the information. We relied on people telling us what the information was. I sat in rooms with people that looked me in the face and lied to me, and then we've seen through emails being released that they went out the room and basically communicated in panic, but did not express that to me and to other people, to residents. We brought residents down, we brought pastors down, we sent letters inquiring about information, and people lied. There's no question about it. I mean, I don't throw terms around like lie. They knew the information wasn't true, and they told it anyway. Now, I'm not suggesting that people knew much earlier on the problem of how bad the water was, but they knew there was an issue, and they didn't dig deep into it. And in many cases, they knew it was worse than it was and decided to say the opposite. So I think people are going to be leery for a long time to come. And it's unfortunate because we should be building trust and coming together on issues, and what we're seeing is, in Flint particularly, it's the other way around.
In addition to your laser-like focus on Flint and this ongoing crisis, and while, as we pointed out earlier in this show, the media spotlight has largely left, the issues still remain, you have another hat, and that is you are the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. Now that the fall session's starting back up, what are the agenda items outside of Flint that you would like, and some of them no doubt, tie back into this because we talked about infrastructure, but what are some of the things that you and your colleagues would like to accomplish between now and December 6th?
Well, I think, I kind of look at it a couple of different ways. I'm the minority leader, I'm the leader of the Democrats, and I'm also a leader of 11 members, 8 of which are term limited, right? And they've had a long career. Obviously they can determine the success of their own career. They still have things they want to do. So part of my focus would be, okay, what do you need to get done over the next year and a half? Obviously, if we can get some of it done this year, because next year will be an election year, and unfortunately, less gets done in an election year. So that'd be one thing that I work on. And the second will be, we're going to have issues that are thrust upon us, and there's going to have priorities that we want to work on. One of the things we've probably learned, everyone's learned this summer, is no matter what you think about healthcare, it's a mess coming out of Washington, D.C. And that all the policies that have been brought forward, the CBO and other folks have said they're going to cost more, and people are going to lose access to care. So some of the Democrats and I, the leaders in the House and Senate, my colleagues have put forward a health care Bill of Rights, basically saying, okay, if they decide to scrap the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare and take away a bunch of things at the federal level, protections at the federal level, we at least believe those protections have worked. Whether it's allowing people to stay on their parents' health care at 26, some of those things probably stay either way. But we think those are just a right of being an individual, being a citizen of this great country, and that we should enshrine that into Michigan law. And then another thing we've seen is some of those, we've seen the most egregious was with the EpiPen, the dramatic increase. Once someone has a need for it, it becomes more prevalent, and then they do these huge markups. We're also proposing some legislation about dealing with that as well. We're seeing some other states finding ways to address it to make sure that citizens aren't gouged. I think healthcare is going to be something we focus on. And we could stop and talk about that, but also I think something that's going to be sort of brought before the forefront is auto no-fault reform. And that's something that I'm more than willing to be a part of the conversation. I want to make sure it's a real conversation. It's not an agenda of a special interest. We're going to just ram it through, because I don't see a point of being through that. I want to make sure that consumers in the viewing areas that you represent in your television program, and the areas that I represent, that we see real rate reductions, and that we make sure that there's still quality of care. And I think there's a way to do that that's not partisan. That's actually looking at, okay, what's the best interest? How do we deal with this? Whether that's prompt payment, whether that's transparency, whether it's some of the things other people have proposed. There's really no proposal that I won't entertain, as long as the other side is entertaining the proposals that we have as well. So I think we can come together on some of these issues, because I don't know anybody that's ever said, I'm pretty happy with my auto insurance rates. If you find that person, feel free to send them my way, but it's a legitimate issue that we need to find a solution to.
So after years of struggling, the residents of Flint continue to try to recover from the water crisis that made national headlines, but continues to be part of their daily routine. We'll be back with more To the Point. So the legislature in Lansing is back in session, and we'll continue to watch as Republicans and Democrats try to find some common ground. In Washington, the U.S. Senate and House will also be back in session. So I hope you'll join us. We'll have lots of news every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock right here on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.